recent rate hike, as well as the Federal Reserve's warning for 2023, we should first talk about the latest inflation report that came out yesterday morning. Because once you understand this, everything else will begin to make a lot of sense. See, since 2021, we've had one main problem, and that would be inflation, or I guess namely the fact that inflation was not going down. As you could see, we began an uptick of prices every single month that just kept going higher and higher and higher. But then 2022 was more of the same. In the first half of the year, inflation increased as high as 9.1% in June, while the Federal Reserve resorted to larger than expected rate hikes to bring everything back down, and it appears to be working. Over the last 5 months, inflation has consistently begun to fall from its peak, and most recently, November's data suggests an inflation reading of 7.1%, which is high, but it's still significantly lower than what was expected. And that means there's a lot of data to suggest that rate hikes may be soon coming to an end. And in terms of exactly where inflation fell, here's what you need to know. See, on a broad scale, consumer inflation declined on a year-over-year basis. But what's even better news is that month-over-month, inflation only rose by 0.1%, implying that if we stay on the exact same trajectory, we could theoretically return back to 1.2% inflation by the end of 2023. Of course, I realize that we're absolutely getting ahead of ourselves here, and we can't just assume that this will continue indefinitely, especially because if people believe inflation is over, they will start spending more money, making inflation less likely to be over. But in terms of what's leading inflation right now, the biggest contributor seems to be none other than housing. As they report, the overall cost of shelter increased by 0.6% month over month, which is a big deal when shelter makes up a third of the overall inflation reading. On top of that, when you dig a little bit deeper, you'll see that the rent index rose by 0.8% month over month, and owner's equivalent rent rose by 0.7% month over month, suggesting that rents could rise another 5 to 7%. However, I will say that in regards to these numbers, we do have some good news and some bad news, and I guess I'll start with the bad news first. Since these inflation numbers don't use the actual rent increases, they instead use what's called owner's equivalent rent, which can be a lot less reliable. This is all obtained by asking homeowners, if someone were to rent your home out today, how much do you think it would rent for monthly unfurnished and without utilities? This brings up a major red flag that many homeowners might not know what their home would accurately rent for, and it's entirely dictated by opinion instead of fact. In addition to that, the rent index also calibrates for what's called quality adjustments, meaning they take into account newer features which were not previously available, and then subtracting that from the total rent to get a base that could be a lot lower than the amount you're actually paying. However, the good news is that rents are often a lagging indicator because the data we have today is often a reflection of the months prior. And with national rents now beginning to drop, chances are this will take all the way up to a year to reflect in the latest readings. Why is this a good thing? Well, the Fed understands this, and they're most likely not going to use this as a tool to increase interest rates faster than absolutely necessary. As far as everything else, though, almost all items declined across the board from a month earlier, like food prices, cheaper, energy and gasoline, less money, used cars down 2.9%, airline fares save 3% on your trip to getting a free stock down below in the description when you sign up for our sponsor, public.com, using the code GRAHAM. Okay, jokes aside, besides housing, only a few items got more expensive throughout the last month, and that would be apparel, tobacco, vehicle maintenance, telephone services, laundry, and haircuts, which is a good sign that inflation is finally beginning to cool down. Except for tamale prices. Those are still up. So in terms of the most recent rate hike, as of a few hours ago, and what Jerome Powell said is most likely going to happen throughout these next few months, we should first talk about the implications throughout the stock and housing market, because there are a lot of changes that are beginning to go into effect. First, let's talk about the housing market. The mortgage giant Fannie Mae found that 62% of consumers believe that mortgage rates will continue to go higher, while the Federal Reserve sticks to their plan of fighting inflation to the bitter end. And even though